Heather Duplessis-Allen.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the United Nations has failed in its response to the war in Ukraine. She says Russia being in the Security Council is a morally bankrupt position on the UN's part. Ardern also talked about how more generally the world is bloody messy at the moment. With us now is Jeffrey Miller from the Democracy Project. Hey, Jeffrey.
Good evening, Heather.
It seems remarkable, those comments about the UN. Do you think so?
Yes and no, Heather. I think look, New Zealand has taken for a long time the position that the UN needs reform. Peter Fraser, back in 1945, when the UN was set up, opposed the veto for the Security Council members. So I don't think this is new, in a sense. I think it would have gone down well with the Australian audience, so that she was speaking to call for unilateral action when needed. And that's the position that New Zealand has subscribed to over the past few months. It's aligned its foreign policy with Australia, the US, the EU and the West.
What are the chances that, it's one thing obviously to call for reform, it's quite another to get everybody on board. What are the chances that New Zealand's voice carries enough weight to see that happen?
Virtually nil, Heather, in the current environment. I don't see any prospect of change in the medium term or the short term. I don't think that stops New Zealand calling for it. It's a popular line in a sense. But I would like to see just some more practical steps. Ardern talks a lot in the speech of diplomacy and needing to provide cooperation with China and so forth. But I don't see actually meaningful steps being taken to back up the rhetoric. So I think the story of this speech, it's really a lot of words, a lot of rhetoric. It's not really matching the actions that you're seeing New Zealand taking.
What are the steps that we should take?
Well, I think if we want to have cooperation with China, we should be inviting them to chat. Wang Yi was in the region not that long ago. New Zealand did not invite him to New Zealand to talk over the differences. They're not going to be at the Pacific Islands Forum. There's usually a wider meeting of dialogue partners at the Pacific Islands Forum that's being held next week in Fiji. That's been next this year, so China won't be there. So, it's all very well to talk about cooperation and diplomacy and the need to work through our differences, but I don't actually see New Zealand taking a lead on that at all, and it's a shame. I think it's a missed opportunity. Jacinda Ardern talks a lot about bridge building and these things, but we're not seeing that backed up with real actions.
Jeffrey, do you reckon there was a message to Australia in there when she said, "I hope you will find us both on our own terms, pulling in the same direction"?
It was a really ambiguous speech, Heather, to be honest. I watched the whole thing and I watched the Q&A afterwards, and there's really something in there for everybody. You could really interpret that speech in any way you like. You could see it as condemning the UN. You could see it as supporting the West. You could see it also as being critical of Australia and the West. She emphasised, New Zealand's disarmament, nuclear-free credentials, which, is something that Australia does not really share in other Western countries. So, there really was something in there for everybody. You can take something home that will, support your argument no matter which side of the argument you're on. So I think everyone goes home happy in some ways, but also frustrated because, there's just so much ambiguity in that speech.
Brilliant stuff. It's good to talk to you. Thank you, Jeffrey. Jeffrey Miller, Democracy Project. Right now it's 5:12.
This is News Talk ZB News.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm Raylene Ramsey. When you see something, say something. That was the Prime Minister's message this afternoon when she urged China and other superpowers to do more to prevent Russian aggression. Jacinda Ardern was also critical of the UN, but says it's important New Zealand holds even the biggest countries in the world to account.
When we see a threat, regardless of your ideology, you should speak up. I don't consider that conciliatory. I consider that us taking a very strong values-based position.
And little surprise about the Prime Minister striking out at the United Nations. Democracy Project's Jeffrey Miller says New Zealand has taken the position for a long time the UN needs reform.
Peter Fraser, back in 1945, when the UN was set up, opposed the veto for the Security Council members. So I don't think this is new.
All you need to know from the world of business. It's the Business Hour with Heather Duplessis-Allen. Thanks to MyHR. This is News Talk ZB News.
It's 6:32. I'm Raylene Ramsey. Foreign policy analysts are not surprised Jacinda Ardern has launched an attack on the UN. In a keynote speech in Sydney, she's warned the UN has failed in its response to the Ukraine war. Ardern has told the Lowy Institute Russia's veto in the Security Council is the problem. Democracy Project's Geoffrey Miller says New Zealand has said for a long time the UN needs reform.
Peter Fraser, back in 1945, when the UN was set up, opposed the veto for the Security Council members. So I don't think this is new.
Mike Hosking, Jack Tame, Heather Duplessis-Allen, Francesca Rudkin. All the names you can trust. This is News Talk ZB News.
It's 10 o'clock. I'm Tony Doe. A foreign policy expert claims the Prime Minister's strong words on the Ukraine war and the UN's role will have little impact. Jacinda Ardern says the UN has failed to appropriately respond to the war. In a speech at the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Ardern also noted China has a responsibility as a member of the Council to take action. But the Democracy Project's Geoffrey Miller says it's mainly grandstanding with little prospect of change at the moment.
Ardern talks a lot in the speech of diplomacy and needing to provide cooperation with China and so forth, but I don't see actually meaningful steps being taken to back up the rhetoric.
New Zealand's #1 commercial radio station. This is News Talk ZB News.
It's 11 o'clock. I'm Tony Doe. Foreign policy analysts are not surprised Jacinda Ardern has launched an attack on the UN. In a keynote speech in Sydney, she's warned the UN has failed in its response to the Ukraine war. Ardern has told the Lowy Institute Russia's veto in the Security Council is the problem. Democracy Project's Geoffrey Miller says New Zealand has said the UN needs reform for a long time.
Peter Fraser, back in 1945, when the UN was set up, opposed the veto for the Security Council members. So I don't think this is new.